Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a book that might just flip everything you think you know about business on its head. What if I told you that working longer hours doesn't lead to success, that you need less than you think to start a business, that planning might actually be holding you back? Sounds crazy, right? Well, buckle up, because we're about to explore these ideas and more in our deep dive into Rework by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson. Before we jump in, I want to remind you that you can find a link to purchase Rework in our show notes, along with a full transcript and some amazing visualizations over at ceoslibrary.com. And now, let's rethink work. In the fast-paced, hustle-obsessed world of modern business, Rework stands out like a beacon of counterintuitive wisdom. Written by the founders of 37 Signals, now known as Basecamp, this book challenges nearly every aspect of conventional business thinking. Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson aren't your typical business gurus. They built a wildly successful company by doing things their own way, often in direct opposition to what business schools and consultants recommend. So, who are these rebels? Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson started 37 Signals as a web design company in 1999. Over time, they developed their own project management tool, Basecamp, which became so successful that they shifted their entire focus to software. What's remarkable is how they did it. Without outside funding, without a huge team, and without working themselves to the bone. They proved that you can build a profitable, growing business while maintaining a healthy work-life balance. Now, let's dive into some of the core principles that make Rework such a revolutionary book. Our first stop, the power of constraints. Imagine you're planning a vacation. You've got unlimited time and an unlimited budget. Sounds great, right? But here's the thing. You might find yourself paralyzed by all the options. Where do you even start? Now, imagine instead that you have just 3 days and a modest budget. Suddenly, you're forced to get creative. You have to prioritize, to make the most of what you have. This is the essence of what Fried and Hansson call embracing constraints. They argue that limitations aren't setbacks, they're advantages. When resources are scarce, you're forced to be creative. You can't throw money at problems or hire your way out of them. Instead, you have to think smarter and work more efficiently. Let me give you a real-world example. When 37 Signals was developing Basecamp, they were still running their web design business. They didn't have a team of developers to dedicate to the project. Instead, they had to work on it in the margins, squeezing development into the hours between client work. This constraint forced them to focus on the essential features, to build only what was truly necessary. The result? A streamlined, user-friendly product that did exactly what it needed to do. No bloat, no unnecessary complications. So how can you apply this principle to your own work or business? Start by asking yourself, what are my constraints? Maybe you're short on time, or money, or both. Instead of seeing these as obstacles, try to see them as guardrails, keeping you focused on what really matters. Can you build a prototype with the tools you already have instead of investing in expensive new software? Can you launch a minimal viable product instead of waiting until everything is perfect? Embracing constraints isn't just about making do with less. It's about thriving within your limitations. It's about finding creative solutions that you might never have discovered if you had unlimited resources. So the next time you find yourself wishing for more time, more money, more people, stop and ask yourself, how can I make the most of what I already have? Now, let's shift gears and talk about something that might be even more controversial, the myth of growth. We live in a world obsessed with bigger, faster, more. From the moment a new business launches, it seems like everyone starts asking, when are you going to scale up? When are you going to hire more people? When are you going to seek funding? But Fried and Hansson pose a radical question. What if staying small is actually the key to success? Let me tell you a story about a small business that chose to stay small and thrive because of it. There's a restaurant in Chicago called Alinea. It's widely considered one of the best restaurants in the world. They could easily expand, open locations in New York, Los Angeles, London, but they don't. They maintain a single location with a limited number of seats. Why? Because they understand that their success comes from maintaining an incredibly high standard of quality and innovation. By staying small, they can control every aspect of the dining experience, ensuring that every single guest has an unforgettable meal. This goes against everything we're usually told about business success. We're conditioned to believe that if a business isn't growing, it's dying. But Fried and Hansson argue that this mentality often leads to unnecessary complexity, reduced quality, and burned-out employees. They point out that when a company grows, communication becomes more complex. You need more meetings, more memos, more managers. Suddenly, people are spending more time talking about work than actually doing work. Sound familiar? So, how do you determine the right size for your company? Fried and Hansson suggest asking yourself a simple question. What do you need? Not what do you want, or what do you think you should have, but what do you actually need to serve your customers well and maintain a good quality of life for yourself and your employees? Maybe you don't need a huge sales team. Maybe you don't need a fancy office. Maybe you don't need to be in every market around the globe. By staying small and focused, you can maintain the agility to adapt quickly, the intimacy to really know your customers, and the freedom to do work you're proud of. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but what about economies of scale? What about market dominance? These are valid considerations, but they often come at a cost. The larger an organization gets, the harder it becomes to maintain quality, to innovate, to keep that spark that made the company special in the first place. Remember, success isn't just about revenue or market share. It's about building a sustainable business that you enjoy running, that provides value to your customers, and that allows you and your employees to have fulfilling lives outside of work. So the next time you're tempted to expand just for the sake of expanding, pause and ask yourself, is this growth necessary? Is it going to make my product better, my customers happier, or my business more sustainable? If not, maybe it's time to embrace the power of staying small. Now, let's talk about something that affects all of us, regardless of the size of our organization: productivity. In Rework, Fried and Hansson drop a bombshell. Meetings and long to-do lists might actually be killing your productivity. Think about your typical workday. How much of it is spent in meetings? How much time do you spend managing your to-do list rather than actually doing the work? If you're like most people, the answer is probably too much. Fried and Hansson argue that interruptions are the enemy of productivity. Every time you're pulled into a meeting or distracted by an email notification, you're taken out of your flow. And it's not just the time spent in the meeting or reading the email, it's the time it takes to refocus and get back into the zone. Here's a challenge for you. Next week, try to have a day with no meetings. None. Zero. Spend that time doing actual work instead. You might be amazed at how much you can accomplish when you have long, uninterrupted stretches of time to focus. But what about collaboration, you might ask? What about team communication? Fried and Hansson aren't suggesting we never meet or never communicate. They're advocating for more purposeful, efficient communication. Instead of hour-long meetings, try quick stand-ups. Instead of constant chat messages, try setting aside specific times for communication and collaboration. Now, let's talk about to-do lists. We all love the feeling of crossing items off a list, but Fried and Hansson argue that long to-do lists can actually be counterproductive. They suggest breaking your lists down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Instead of one long list of 100 items, try 10 lists of 10 items each. This approach makes the work feel more manageable and gives you more frequent feelings of accomplishment as you complete each mini-list. But perhaps the most radical productivity hack in Rework is the idea of making quick decisions. Fried and Hansson argue that many of us waste time and energy agonizing over decisions that don't really matter in the long run. They suggest making decisions quickly, even if they're not perfect. You can always adjust course later, if needed. Here's a practical tip. Next time you're stuck on a decision, give yourself a time limit. Say, I'm going to decide this in the next 10 minutes. You'll be surprised how often you can make a good decision quickly when you remove the luxury of endless deliberation. Remember, the goal isn't to be busy, it's to be productive. It's to actually get meaningful work done. By eliminating unnecessary interruptions, breaking work into manageable chunks, and making decisions more quickly, you can dramatically increase your productivity and probably reduce your stress levels too. Now, let's shift our focus to an area that many businesses struggle with: marketing. In Rework, Fried and Hansson challenge conventional wisdom about marketing and offer a refreshing alternative. Have you ever wondered why so many marketing efforts fail? Why do we scroll past ads without a second glance? Why do we delete promotional emails without even opening them? According to Fried and Hansson, it's because traditional marketing often feels inauthentic and pushy. It's about shouting your message as loudly as possible, hoping that someone will listen. But what if there was a better way? What if, instead of interrupting people with your message, you could get them to seek you out? This is where the power of teaching comes in. Fried and Hansson suggest that one of the most effective forms of marketing is simply sharing your knowledge. Think about it. When you're looking for information on a topic, who do you trust more? Someone trying to sell you something, or someone who's freely sharing valuable information? Let me give you an example. 37 Signals, the company behind Rework, has a blog called Signal V. Noise. They don't use this blog to push their products. Instead, they share insights about business, design, and programming. They teach what they know. And guess what? This blog has built them a loyal following of people who trust their expertise and are interested in what they have to say. This approach to marketing has several advantages. First, it positions you as an expert in your field. When you freely share valuable information, you demonstrate your expertise and build trust with your audience. Second, it creates a reason for people to keep coming back to you. If they know they can get valuable insights from your blog, your podcast, or your social media, they'll keep returning, and they'll be more likely to think of you when they need products or services in your field. But how do you build an audience that cares about your message? Fried and Hansson suggest a few strategies. First, be authentic. Don't try to sound like a big corporation if you're not one. Use your real voice. Share your actual experiences, including your failures and what you've learned from them. Second, be consistent. Building an audience takes time. You need to consistently provide value over a long period. It's not about going viral, it's about steadily growing a loyal following. Third, focus on teaching things that will always be relevant in your field. While it's good to stay current, the core principles of your industry probably don't change that often. By focusing on these timeless topics, you create content that will be valuable for years to come. Fourth, don't be afraid to have opinions. Bland, middle-of-the-road content doesn't inspire loyalty. Take a stand on issues in your industry. Not everyone will agree with you, but those who do will become passionate followers. Remember, the goal here isn't to create content for the sake of content. It's to genuinely help people, to freely share your expertise in a way that adds value to their lives or businesses. When you do that consistently, you build more than an audience. You build a community of people who trust you and value what you have to say. This approach to marketing requires patience. You won't see overnight results, but over time, you'll build something much more valuable than a list of leads. You'll build a loyal audience that sees you as a trusted resource. Now, let's talk about something that's crucial for long-term success but often overlooked: building a sustainable company culture. Imagine this scenario. A startup is growing rapidly. The founders, realizing they need to create a company culture, decide to install a ping pong table, institute casual Fridays, and write up a list of core values to hang on the wall. Sound familiar? This is what Fried and Hansson might call artificially manufacturing company culture, and they argue it's completely missing the point. You see, according to Rework, you don't create a culture. Culture happens. It's the result of consistent behavior over time. It's not about the perks you offer or the values you claim to have. It's about how you actually operate day to day. This brings us to one of the most provocative ideas in Rework, the concept that policies are organizational scar tissue. Every time something goes wrong, the natural instinct is to create a policy to prevent it from happening again. Someone comes in late too often? Create a strict attendance policy. Someone abuses their expense account? Institute a complex approval process for all expenses. But Fried and Hansson argue that this approach is misguided. These policies are often an overreaction to a situation that's unlikely to happen again. Worse, they punish everyone for the mistakes of a few. Over time, layers of policies can create a rigid, bureaucratic environment that stifles creativity and autonomy. So, what's the alternative? Fried and Hansson suggest creating an environment of trust and autonomy. Instead of trying to control every aspect of how people work, give them the freedom to work in the way that's best for them. Instead of creating a policy every time something goes wrong, address issues directly with the individuals involved. This approach requires a fundamental shift in how we think about management. Instead of trying to prevent every possible problem, we need to hire people we trust and then actually trust them to do their jobs. It means being comfortable with a certain level of uncertainty and accepting that occasionally things might go wrong. But the benefits of this approach are enormous. When people feel trusted and have autonomy over their work, they're more engaged, more creative, and more productive. They feel a sense of ownership over their work, which leads to better results. Here's a practical example from 37 Signals. They don't track vacation days. Instead, they trust their employees to take the time off they need and to ensure their work is covered. This policy, or rather, this lack of policy, sends a powerful message. We trust you to be responsible adults and to do what's best for both you and the company. Building a sustainable culture also means being mindful of work-life balance. Fried and Hansson are big advocates for reasonable work hours. They argue that constantly working long hours is not only unsustainable, but also counterproductive. Tired, burned-out employees don't do their best work. So how can you start building a more sustainable culture in your organization? Start by examining your existing policies. Are they really necessary? Are they solving real, ongoing problems? Or are they relics of past issues? Consider which ones you could eliminate to give your team more autonomy. Next, look at your actions. Are you demonstrating the values you want to see in your company? Remember, culture isn't what you say. It's what you do consistently over time. Finally, focus on hiring the right people. When you have a team of responsible, motivated individuals, you need fewer rules and policies. You can give them the autonomy to do their best work and trust that they will. Building a sustainable culture isn't easy. It requires ongoing effort and a willingness to trust your team. But the result is a workplace where people are engaged, creative, and genuinely happy to be there. And that's the kind of culture that leads to long-term success. As we wrap up our exploration of Rework, let's recap some of the key takeaways from this revolutionary book. First, embrace constraints. Limited resources can fuel creativity and force you to focus on what's truly essential. Second, question the assumption that growth is always good. Sometimes staying small can be a strategic advantage, allowing you to maintain quality and agility. Third, rethink productivity. Minimize interruptions, break tasks into manageable chunks, and don't be afraid to make quick decisions. Fourth, market by teaching. Share your knowledge freely and build an audience that trusts and values your expertise. Finally, build a sustainable culture based on trust and autonomy, not rigid policies and artificial perks. These ideas may seem counterintuitive, even radical. They challenge much of what we've been taught about how to run a successful business. But that's exactly what makes Rework so valuable. It forces us to question our assumptions and consider new ways of working. So here's my challenge to you. Choose one idea from Rework and implement it this week. Maybe you'll have a no-meeting day to boost productivity. Maybe you'll start a blog to share your industry knowledge. Or maybe you'll review your company policies and see which ones you can eliminate. Whatever you choose, I'd love to hear about it. Share your experiences with us on social media or write to us at the email address in the show notes. Remember, you can find a link to purchase Rework in the description below and the accompanying visualizations at ceoslibrary.com. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Rework. Until next time, keep thinking and keep growing.